I'd like to welcome everyone to our online debates with Sauk Valley Media. Tonight we have with us State Representative Richard Morthland. He represents the 71st House District, a Republican. He's being challenged in the November 6th general election by Mike Smitty, a Democrat from Hillsdale. Unfortunately, Mr. Smitty's campaign denied our invitation to debate, so tonight we have an interview with Mr. Morthland, who did accept our invitation, obviously, and we're happy to have him here. My name is Jeff Rogers. I'm the managing editor of Sauk Valley Media, and we'll begin, Rich, with talk about the differences between you and your opponent and what you think makes you a better candidate, a better state representative.
Absolutely. Well, first off, let me say thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for having me in. This is wonderful. It's exciting to see old media moving to new media simultaneously. No, that's just great, and it's really wonderful. And this is an important opportunity for me because, as you well know, with redistricting, the Sauk Valley now has the population base of our district, and that is extremely important. Obviously, I still am in parts of 4 counties, but the big population base is right here in Sterling Rock Falls. And so that is super important that we work together, because you guys are the eyes and ears of the people, and it's wonderful that you're doing this. So now, why am I better than my opponent? There are a number of reasons. Without saying anything against him, I think probably the first and most important thing is that in the Illinois General Assembly, we have a situation where a man who has been in the House since the Beatles were a band, who has been Speaker of the House for all but 2 years since the swearing in 1983, from Chicago, has just been running the show with an iron fist. And by default, and he has agreed that he will do this, my opponent will vote to retain the Speaker in his place. And whereas I was one of 6 pickups on our side in the last cycle that cut the Speaker's majority in half. And of the good things that happened in the first 2 years, in my first term, in the last 2 years, I think most of that in the House was because of the fact that the Speaker didn't have the super strong majority that he had in the past. He has to hold things a whole lot closer and a whole lot tighter. So the first thing, without a doubt, is that I am a person who is in the minority party who weakens the Speaker's strength, and in fact weakens Chicago's strength over Illinois. And so there's that, and that's almost undeniable, that the first vote is the most important. But after that, I'm absolutely confident that I'm a person who has a better grip on this district, on its people, on its values. And when I say values, sometimes people jump to social issues, but what we really value is the opportunity to have a good job, do a hard day's work, and get a reasonable paycheck for it. And I believe that that is going to happen best through free enterprise. When people need to hire workers, we have to have a solid economy. My opponent, and I'm not saying he only believes in government employment, but every time somebody talks about a specific job creation issue that I've ever been around him or experienced, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, he only talks about government employment. And government employment is not the way to have a healthy economy, good jobs, and opportunity for our next generation. And so, that's really huge. We have a situation where Illinois' #1 export is agriculture, and our #2 export is our college graduates. We cannot continue to have this sort of brain drain, if you will, on our state. It is one of the most terrible things. I've often said that the worst thing about the 71st District is that it has 5 bridges out on the one end and interstates out on the other. And people can get away. And so having that hypersensitivity of the issues that are comparative with other states, because I live 5 miles from the Mississippi River, about 2 or 3 miles from Whiteside County, where our family's always farmed there. I would say my ancestors had the good sense to settle on the other side of Meridosha Creek. I live in God's country, but they settled on our side, which is fine. But I do happen to live in Rock Island County. But in all honesty, those are the big brush issues. We need to look at how we can strengthen our economy. I'm going to be better at that. That's why I'm endorsed by the Chamber of Commerce, by National Federation of Independent Businesses. That the people who are into job creation understand that I know these things.
In your guest column that you had in our newspaper, I think it was October 16th, you mentioned that you've moved some significant legislation through in your first term. Could you talk a little bit about
some of the Projobs bills? Let's look at those. We did some great work on earned income. We did some great work on enterprise zones, and the governor came and signed that. I was very happy to be there when he did that. We did good work on the R&D tax credit. That helps some of our major manufacturers. Now the problem is, for instance, John Deere. John Deere does all their R&D in Waterloo, Iowa. They don't do it at their headquarters in Moline. Why? Because there's a permanent R&D tax credit in the state of Iowa. We doubled the trigger for the state estate tax, or death tax, as those of us in agriculture generally call it. And those are some of the things we've done. Some other good work for job creation, but those are some of the bills that I've supported. Also, too, my actual, at this point, trademark bill is what was called HB 3500, and it kept. What it did was it made a small change to our Freedom of Information Act, which we need a good, strong Freedom of Information Act. We absolutely need that. The overhaul they did was overdue and very necessary. But we ended up with a situation where, according to our Attorney General, people could make requests and get the information of private firearm owners. And that really is, their names and addresses. Anybody could make a request and get that. And that led to a flurry of concerns. Firearm owners were concerned that criminals could use it as a shopping list. And I also got a lot of calls and letters from people who are not firearm owners who said, no, I have to go get a FOID card. I don't want people knowing I don't have guns. So we carved out a small exemption in the Freedom of Information Act to protect that information. And a parallel that I'll give you is we also basically at the same time, carved out an exemption for children in Little League programs, in Parks and Recs programs. The Parks and Recs people were very concerned that perhaps pedophiles might use that information to find targets. At the same time, we also ran through House Resolution 89, which called for a full audit of the FOID card program, and that was very telling. In fact, it actually accomplished, I think, the best ends of the original AP request. We found out that the FOID card program is in serious trouble, and I'm continuing to work on making legislation to improve that. But that was a major bill, a major legislative package I put through.
Okay. Our next question will be asked by Sauk Valley Media reporter David Giuliani.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. You signed the Grover Norquist Americans for Tax Reform pledge, vowing not to raise any taxes, and that's on the internet, on that website. Tom Demmer yesterday said he would not sign that pledge, although he said he wants taxes reduced. He just doesn't want to sign a pledge, absolute pledge. If there was a bill in the legislature and you worked with Democratic leaders, including Madigan, and you got 10-to-1 spending cuts to tax increases, so 10 to 1, and those cuts are something you wanted, you got what you wanted, and it was a good negotiation, but the only thing they're asking is 10 to 1, just a little bit of tax increases. Would you go for it?
That's a great question. Illinois' problem is not that we are undertaxed. Illinois' problem historically has been that we are overspent. And again, as I've already mentioned, having a high sensitivity to the comparative disadvantages that we have with other states, not only our immediate neighbors, which are significant, but other states across the country, I believe at this point, Illinois doesn't need any increases in taxes, and I'm being very responsive to my constituents who don't want to pay any more in taxes either. It's a great question, I understand, and when one makes pledges, it's a big deal. But, you know, I'll tell you this, and not to change the subject, but the big pledge I'm making in this campaign cycle is that now, with the new district and having a population in primarily 2 counties, I will have a district office in the Sterling Rock Falls area. I will have one. I'll actually have to have 2. I'll have to have one in the Illinois Quad Cities, and I'll need to have one here. I will have a district office presence because we need to serve constituents. But that's it. When you said pledge, that reminded me. But yeah, it is a tough thing. I've also made other strong stances, and I think that's worked out well.
Okay. Our next question will be asked by Jim Dunn, our editorial page editor.
Thank you, Jeff. Representative Morthland, the state owes billions of dollars to its vendors. I think I saw the latest figure was close to $9 billion, perhaps. What's one thing you think the state should do to pay its bills more quickly?
Well, the good news is that we've already taken some small steps in the right direction. What Illinois needs to do, number one, is live within its means, without a doubt. And I will tell you, it's really frustrating in the Illinois House, where I think, even though it's far from perfect, I think the Illinois House in the last 2 years has led the way toward Illinois fiscal responsibility. We fight a lot with the governor. Actually, it's very difficult because we've sent out 2 decent budgets in my 2 years, and it's been a bipartisan action. I was actually, excuse me, I was quite shocked when we had a decent budget process in the Illinois House. For instance, basically in the preceding 30 years before I was elected, the budget would show up on lawmakers' desks about 3 hours before they were supposed to vote on it. All a closed-door operation. All right. The last 2 years before I was elected, and this it shows that they didn't do a good job of training the new governor. The last 2 years, there were no line item appropriations in the budget whatsoever. It was a lump sum appropriation, and the lawmakers left town for the summer and said, here you go, this is how much money is in the checkbook, Governor, spend it wisely. Then that's basically how they treated him for the first 2 years. Now, contrast that with what we've done in my short time there. We've started by making realistic budget and income estimates. How much money is the state of Illinois going to bring in? Realistic. And actually, the House's estimates have been closer than anybody else's. Closer than COGFA's, closer than the Senate, definitely closer than the governor. All right. Then, we've promised not to spend a dime more than we intend to bring in. Then we pay our first bills first. We would have a far smaller pension problem in this state if that practice had been engaged in right along, if we'd paid our first bills first. Then we take what's left after we paid our first bills first. And then we put that into the 5 appropriations committees, on one of which I sit. And then we go through in an extremely bipartisan manner, line by line, and work out those pieces of the budget. That's a good system. We have had such a flawed system in the state of Illinois. No wonder we're broke. No wonder. Especially, too, when we have this push and pull. And I'm not a Chicago hater, but you have to look at the reality that big states with big cities have some particular big problems. And we can't let Chicago drag us off the cliff. So consequently, is basically, we should keep moving in the direction we've started. We should increase doing it better. Eventually, we didn't get into this mess overnight. We didn't get into this mess overnight. We won't get out of it overnight. And it is a frustrating thing. And I understand. I'm a vendor for the state. At one time, just for my lodging expenses and travel, I get paid mileage to go back and forth, and they cover my lodging expenses. And at one point, the state of Illinois was in arrears to me personally for $6,000 of lodging and travel costs. So I understand the pain that our vendors feel. I've experienced it myself, which is probably a good thing when you think about it. Well, except that my wife wasn't very happy. But in all honesty, you know, we need to start, the more we fly right, the tighter the cycles will get. And we don't need to borrow our way out of it, and we also don't need to give, and I'm picking on the governor again, but we don't need to give the governor more leeway, because he will, if the past is a predictor of the future, he will try to spend things his way, and we're the people who write the budget. That's our job. His is executed.
So if increases in taxes are essentially off the board in your mind, obviously to cure the state's fiscal crisis, which as you said will take a long time, will have to come through spending cuts, essentially.
It's part of it, but there's more than one way to grow a budget. There's more than one way to grow revenues. Revenues are not just about the tax rates. They're also about revving up the economy in the state of Illinois and getting more people working, getting people having better jobs, getting our businesses to pay more taxes because they're having more success. And that's the best way to do it. And see, I'm not opposed to us having more income. We need more income. Also, too, when you look at Illinois, and again, comparison with other states, we went deeper into the recession, we've stayed in the recession longer, and we're slower to come out. All right? Well, again, if we can, and part of that, I believe, is because the people who are real job creators, real engines of growth, are afraid that their state is going to come at them. Why not? They passed a huge tax increase hours before I was sworn in. I believe that if we can make serious changes in Springfield, change a few personnel, we will have so many people wanting to invest in this state, wanting to change things. By contrast, what do we have? Well, Jimmy John's is leaving now. You know, how many more? Caterpillar's thinking about it. We can't let this exodus continue. We have to reverse it, and then I do believe we will have greater revenues because people will pay more taxes because they'll be making more money.
Even if that happens, however, spending cuts will have to be a big part of solving that crisis. What kind of spending cuts do you think are necessary, and how would those cuts affect residents of the 71st District?
Well, again, the good news is that we've gotten the balance, we've gotten the budget balanced. The concern, honestly, is that if our pension payments, if we don't do anything about pension reform, and our pension payments continue to grow and grow and grow, they're going to swallow the budget whole. You know, total of, I can't remember, but depending on how you figure, it was like a total of about $8 billion in payments had to go to take care of that problem last year between the current payments and back payments. Right? If this trend continues, we're going to be in massive, massive trouble. Now, the good news on the other hand is we've already made some extremely difficult choices. When you look at the Medicaid reform package that we passed this year, we cut costs dramatically. And we're going to save the state. And that was really hard. It is extremely difficult work to roll back an entitlement once it's ever been granted. Now, most of what we did was just pull back on Blagojevich era expansion. We did end the Illinois Cares RX program, Illinois Cares RX. We did end that program, and we've taken some flack for it. But look at it this way: since Medicare Part D was enacted at the federal level, every other state that had any kind of drug program for seniors had already ended it. We were the last one. So if we are spending money on something that no other state is spending money, by definition, that's a Cadillac program. We can't afford it, and we had to cut it. And it was difficult, painful, and entitlement. And there are people who have been critical of us for doing it, and yet, again, we were the only state in the nation that had it. So we've already taken some of the difficult steps, and we've shown, I think, especially in the House, again, and not to pick on I will pick on the rest of the government, but in the House, I think we've shown that we have more fortitude. And I again believe a lot of that is because Speaker Madigan has a small majority. And when he needs to do something big, he pretty well has to come to us for votes and for help. And if it doesn't stay that way, Katie, bar the door.
Yes, and you mentioned the pensions, and a big proposal out there in Springfield is a proposal to transfer the teacher pension costs from the state to local school districts. Some people argue that this would hold school districts more accountable because they control the salaries, and if the salaries go up in those final years, it's ultimately the state's costing the pensions. So do you support a proposal like that to transfer those costs to local school districts?
Not like it's been proposed at all. I think you raise a good point in the sense that there would be a benefit in having direct accountability between school boards and their pension costs with teachers. I think that's an advantage to changing the system. At the same time, well, I shouldn't say we, this is established obviously long before I came in, but the system we have in place was established to allow poorer school districts to compete effectively with richer school districts. And I don't have to look any farther than Whiteside County, where I have Erie, where Blackhawk College sends me there to teach dual enrollment classes on occasion, and I keep telling the students there, thank a uranium-238 atom, kids, because the school is absolutely fabulously wealthy. At the same time, next door we have Prophetstown, a far more typical rural Illinois community that has greater funding issues. It's nice to be able to have these richer and poorer districts be able to compete against each other. I'm not in favor of that plan unless it was somehow backfilled. Even just a shift over time to say let's work it through. Not a good plan unless we backfill it with state funding, which obviously at this point we don't have the extra money. I definitely do not want to drop that in the laps of the taxpayers, because that's what's going to happen. Property taxpayers are going to end up paying that. It'll almost directly shift to them.
You mentioned richer and poor districts in the state, and obviously this state is rated, I believe it's gotten an F for the disparities between the districts. Some states, pretty much, a lot of states now have almost all the money go to the state, and the state distributes the money, as you probably know, per student. The money follows the student, whereas in this state, it appears that there's a huge disparity between districts. Is there anything that you would look at as a legislator to even that out between rich and poor districts?
That's a great question. And again, it's always amazing to me that when teachers groups come to me and they want to talk about parity in regard to funding, they always bring up places like Barrington. You know, they don't talk about East St. Louis. You know, there are advantages with every system, and I understand what you're saying, but I think we have, in general, in this regard, I think we have a strong system because it does keep control local. It keeps funding differences local. I mean, we could make some changes, and I understand what the question is. It's also, the more research we see, the more we know that there's not a direct correlation between the dollars we spend per student and the outcomes we get per student. And I'm not, you know, even though I said, yes, I have two next door to each other school districts where one is very wealthy and the other one's not. Prophetstown does a fine job of educating students. They do a very good job. And so, you know, it's not just about the numbers, the money numbers.
The Sauk Valley is a magnet for tourism, and tourism is good because it brings in visitors and brings in their money, and some of that money is left here when they purchase things, stay in the motels and dine here. And the state parks and museums across the state are similarly important for tourism and recreation, but they suffer from financial problems. Yet the state charges no user fees at either. Would you support the establishment of admission fees for state parks and museums?
Well, we already had a vote on that very question. I voted no. User fees are one thing, admission fees are another. And I understand there are difficulties in the funding, but I did not support increasing. I did not support that when it was up on the floor.
Going back to schools for a second, we've had discussions and some have already happened of consolidating between districts. Would you support a bill at the state level to consolidate school districts and other entities? Why or why not?
That's a great question too. the answer why or why not is going to be a matter of principle. I believe in local control of education, and I don't like the idea of forced consolidation. It is difficult, and sometimes it's odd. One of the things that ends up getting in the way of schools consolidating that reasonably should consider it is because they don't want to give up their mascot. Some of the traditions that we've had right along, et cetera, are very difficult. But I really don't believe that's a matter largely for the state. It's difficult for me because I believe in local control, and yet I see that it's not working as well as it could with local control, and that's a frustration I feel.
My question would be about townships. Lots of states don't have them. And Illinois, as you know, has thousands more government entities than states much larger. Should we keep township government, or should it be phased out? What's your thinking on that?
I am on the Local Government Consolidation Commission, and I serve on that. And we are dealing with some of these. We're working with some of these questions. Illinois does have more entities of government than any other state. Some of them are boards that haven't met in years. They may not even have people on them. It's an odd place once you get into it. But in all honesty, I'll tell you, I live on a township road. I live on a gravel road in Coe Township, in as I said, the very edge of Rock Island County. And when I was on the Rock Island County Board, I went to one of the committees on which I sat was Public Works. And I went to our county highway commissioner, and I said to him, there's talk about getting rid of townships. What do you think? Because you'd have to take over the roads. And he said, well, let me think. They have different size equipment than we do, so we'd have to have probably some smaller equipment. And I'd want to have rapid response, so I'd have to set up garages and other maintenance areas around the county in the rural areas. And then he kept going, and by the time he got done, he had described keeping township government. And so I understand there are certainly some questions that we could ask, but where township government does its work, it serves very well, and I would be resistant to remove it.
This question has something to do with a community that will not be in the 71st district, but you've probably heard of Dixon, Illinois, and its difficulty with the former comptroller.
I don't own any horses. Did when I was a kid.
And one of the complaints is that the annual audits that were done by an auditor hired by the city government in Dixon did not uncover the alleged misappropriations. And other states, such as Indiana, they have a state board of audits, and that conducts regular audits for cities and counties and other units of government. What do you think of the idea of Illinois trying to establish an auditing system such as Indiana has?
I would not oppose that. We need to have good looks at the books, obviously. I wouldn't oppose it. I mean, we'll have to, that's in principle. Obviously, there's a long, and you gentlemen understand this, there's a big difference between saying, here's a concept and here's a bill on my desk. And so we have to get from one to the other. And so in a concept, I think obviously we need more oversight. It's very clear. If the exact process, we're a long way from A to B.
And similarly with Dixon, it has a commission form of government, and some people have criticized that as perhaps being possibly outdated. Perhaps it contributed to the problems that the city had with the misappropriation of funds, $53 million, I think the figure was. Do you think that that is something that the legislature should revisit as far as the types of municipal governments that are permitted in the state?
Well, again, I prefer I prefer government to be as close to home as possible. So I'm really resistant to having the heavy hand of Springfield come down. I understand. And one of the things about Dixon is that obviously none of us yet knows the full story. And obviously when all the facts come out, we'll learn more. I mean, the whole situation, and you obviously know this because you're closer to it than I am in more than one sense. We have to hear the full facts before we know exactly what's going on. And the other thing too is, that there are a lot of systems that could use a tweak or an adjustment or maybe even an overhaul that don't necessarily have to be tossed out.
Let's talk about social issues for just a little bit here, if we could. The agenda of the American Legislative Exchange Council talks a lot about right-to-work laws, restrictions on legal abortions, bans on gay marriage, crackdown on immigration. That's been popular in states with Republican legislatures. If your party wins control of the Illinois legislature, what parts of that agenda would you support?
That's a small question. Well, I'm a social conservative in regard to issues such as abortion, and part of the reason I hold my positions on that is that I'm an adoptee. And to be perfectly honest, I have long felt that if an adoptee does not oppose abortion, it's kind of like Bambi being for a longer hunting season. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense for somebody of my kind. And so I do have personal and other reasons for being pro-life. And I'm supported by Right to Life and a number of pro-family organizations. We also, remind me again, some of the other issues.
Gay marriage, right-to-work laws, immigration.
Okay. When it comes to gay marriage, I don't support that. I believe the traditional marriage. I support that, and it would not be favorable to changing it. When it comes to immigration, I think and obviously that's less of a state issue, but we still can look at it. And we need to look long and hard at immigration in our country. Black Hawk College sends me out to teach at high schools a lot. Actually, I was in one this morning. And I had a fascinating experience at Rock Island High School. I had a student get up and tell a speech about how she was about 5, and she was told her family was taking a trip. It was a long trip, and she was told it might even be kind of dangerous. Her mother was pregnant, but her and her little sister in arms that her dad carried, and her pregnant mother, family all made an illegal crossing from Mexico to the United States. She didn't understand why. She didn't understand the timing. Then a couple of years later, I had the next daughter as a student who said, I know the story, but I don't remember much. And then finally I had the third daughter. And I said, you are the one. You were the reason. Now, an immigration code that makes 2 of those girls criminals and 1 a citizen needs reform. And how to get from A to B is a very complex answer, but obviously that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so, when we talk about immigration, I think we need to be reasonable. We need to deal with the facts. We need to be compassionate, but we also need to regard our national sovereignty. And again, but that's not much of it. When it comes to right to work issues, Illinois is not a right to work state, and I don't see that changing. And it's kind of to me, a moot point. So I have not supported right to work issues. I have not come out in favor of that.
What are your views on the constitutional amendment on the November 6th ballot that would make it harder for future legislatures to approve bills to enhance public employee pensions?
Good question again. I voted for it, and I came this far from voting against it. I came this far from voting against it, but I wasn't going to be the only one. To be the only no vote on something is a pretty big step, and the reason I didn't vote against it is because it's a good idea. The reason I wanted to vote against it is because it's only half the idea. I would have favored it if we had done the same thing for pension holidays. I would fully favored it. I mean, I do favor it because I voted for it. It's not bad. It's a step in the right direction. You know, it shouldn't be easy to drop sweeteners into the pensions. But to be perfectly honest, it is another Springfield election year. There we did something about it and fixed it, Bill, and now. And proposed constitutional amendment. Will I vote for it when I'm in the ballot box? Yes. Did I vote for it when I was on the floor? Yes. Am I happy about it in its, do I think it's what it needs to be? No. For those reasons. I think it works at half the problem.
Okay. Do you believe the state needs to enact any wind farm regulations? That's a topic, obviously, that's been very well debated in this area. For instance, should the state establish a setback between houses and wind turbines?
Well, we actually have looked at a couple of things because obviously there are questions, and there is, in a situation, for instance, where you're in county, where you're outside of, let's say, a small town, and outside the jurisdiction of the small town, you're under county jurisdiction, and if the county has the rules and the people and the residents of the town don't like it, they don't have any say. The difficulty is that we are going to end up having a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach. And so I prefer more of the current system. I'm not very interested in getting super aggressive. I would look at tweaks, but we also need to look at the rights of property owners, you know. It is a big deal, and we don't need to infringe more on the rights of property owners. This is at the same time, I will tell you that from what because we started studying this again back when I was on the county board, because when I was on the Rock Island County Board, there were questions about it, you know, about having, and so, and I will tell you that most of the commercially justifiable areas of Illinois as far as wind production are pretty well already built. It's already happened. So it's probably not going to be a huge escalating issue moving forward, because there just isn't. We have places for wind, but we don't have that many.
You were going back to the pension issue. Is radical reform required to the extent that maybe it needs to be converted to 401ks for pensions, as many in the private sector have?
We'll have to see. There are difficulties. I'm not, well, you know, I'm a freshman in the minority party. I won't be crafting the bill. I know, honesty. They're not going to say, "Hey, Rich, you want to write this for us?" So the particulars are difficult to speak of. I have a 401k type pension with Black Hawk College. My wife and I both do. We don't have a fixed. We don't have a fixed defined benefit plan. And in the future, that's certainly the way private enterprise has gone. I have a friend who is a member of the United Steelworkers, who is a wonderful person, and she and I don't agree on much other than the time of day. And she works at Alcoa. And one day, when she was down to Springfield, engaging me about another matter, and by the way, that's one of the things I love about the House, is you can get the members out to talk to the people while we're in session. I think that's awesome, because we do come out, you know. And by the way, when people come down, you know, let them know to slip in a card or send in a piece of paper. And if you have a representative who's living up to the name representative and they're not super busy, which we are, sometimes aren't, they'll come out and talk to you. And I think that's awesome. So anyway, she was there, and we're talking about another matter. And I said, "Wait a second, what do you guys do about pensions at Alcoa?" She works at Alcoa. And she said, "Well, one day they walked in, they sat us all down, and they said, 'We'll give you two choices. You can keep your defined benefit plan for everything you've earned up till today, and tomorrow everything moves over to a 401k for the rest of your time here.' That's option one. Option two is we close the plan." And they said, "We don't like it, but we take option one." And now they play with their stocks, they have fun, and they watch it grow, and they know that they're going to have those two streams. So moving forward, is that a possibility? Yeah, but I think we should keep all options on the table, and I think particularly one of the types of options. And I apologize, my leg's getting a little sore, and for the viewers know I had a farm accident a few weeks ago, and I'm still convalescing, doing very well. We're grateful for how much everybody cares, but I'm sorry, my leg's a little sore, so that's why I'm fidgeting. And everything needs to be on the table, and I we need to fix this. Illinois is chasing California off the cliff, and one of the reasons is our pensions. The good news, I will tell you, and I'm going to say a positive word about our governor, is that because he enjoys building projects, good capital projects. I like good capital projects, roads and schools, government. That makes sense. Because he enjoys capital projects, he also likes to borrow money. And the bond houses have brought him to the table. So hopefully we can get something done.
The 71st District is not a stranger to waterways. You've got the Mississippi River going down the west side. You've got the Rock River flowing through part of it. And this question is about boating and impaired boaters. There's been a study that linked the increase in deaths on state rivers, streams, and lakes to alcohol use by boaters. And it's legal for boaters to drink alcohol while operating their boats, up to a blood alcohol content of 0.08, and for passengers to do so too. Do you see a need for the legislature to impose restrictions on that activity?
I don't see a direct requirement, although it's certainly something we could look at, because we do need to consider safety, and to think that aside from the numbers being in essence the same, we have completely different set of rules on the road than we have on the waterways. That's a serious issue. And speaking of waterways too, you're right. It is one of the things that defines this district, and and also too, there's a question by a lot of folks in the Sauk Valley. Well, we know we're going to be represented by somebody from Rock Island County. Will Rock Island County dominate us? And I will tell you that last year, when Carroll County experienced its second torrential rainstorm and had flash flooding, as soon as I heard that the storm had come through, I cleared out everything else in my day, and I drove immediately to Carroll County, went up to Savannah, and I inspected everything immediately. In fact, the year before, down in the Quad Cities, they had missed the flood entirely because there was Mississippi River flooding, and the Quad Cities media thought that what was happening in Savannah was an extension of the Mississippi River flooding, and they had no idea it was because of the rainstorm. And I was the one who brought the attention of the Quad City media to that and helped, because poor Savannah was just in terrible. And so I ran right up there and investigated and looked at everything, and that's the way I do this job. I don't just represent where the people are. I represent where my constituents are, where I represent the territory I represent. And it is an important issue as far as flooding. And we've had Rock River flooding, and I'll tell you, when I was in junior high, it was when we had the massive Rock River flood, the big one, where the Meridosha bottoms were all flooded out. And I spent several weeks of junior high life going to school in the high school, because Hillsdale was completely underwater, and that's where my school was at the time. So this has been something the river issues are things we've lived with right along, and things that are important.
Another question would be about Obamacare. Obviously that's a federal issue, but the legislature may have a role in forming a health insurance exchange. In Texas, Governor Perry said, we're not going to cooperate. We don't want the health insurance exchange. If you're in the legislature and there's a vote on Obamacare, about forming that exchange, how would you vote?
Well, there already have been some.
Okay.
Yeah, there already have been some. And the reality is I'm going to oppose it, because I believe that Obamacare, as it passed Congress, was bad legislation. At the same time, I am a minority member of a chamber that is so thrilled that one of our own is, you know, Chicago's just pressing this stuff through as fast as they can. And so it's difficult, but. Oh, and by the way, I just remembered something. When you talked about tourism, I also had legislation that didn't make it, because you'll find out what the reason is. It's pretty obvious. To take away power to change the toll rates from that appointed board. That's what they did to us in doubling our toll rates. Is just dreadful. And when you think about folks from here who work up in Rochelle, or any of us, I was the first person I knew who had an iPass. and so when we talk about tourism, that's one of the things that's very frustrating, is that we have this appointed panel, and it was, well, I know who blocked it, but it didn't get very far, even though it was the right thing to have done. They had to put the legislature on the line before there were any other toll rates, because that was obscene.
I'll ask one last question before we give you an opportunity to make a closing statement. A few minutes ago, you had some words of praise for the governor. Now I'd like to give you an opportunity to offer some constructive criticism for your own party. If there's something that you would change about your party's agenda, what would that be?
When you talk about my party, let's talk at the state level. I will tell you that my party doesn't have an agenda. One of the things that surprised me about joining the General Assembly is that my caucus is incredibly diverse. The people from the different areas think differently. They represent their districts differently. And I will also say that I was with all you hear about the four tops and the heavy hands in Springfield. I will tell you that Minority Leader Cross is one of the most laissez-faire leaders that you could possibly work with. And those people who have time in have told me that when he ran for the position within the caucus, he campaigned on that you are going to have your own. And so I don't mean to dodge it. Obviously, I am a conservative Republican and generally would be a platform guy in that sense. So I'm not trying to dodge the question, but in all honesty, in my caucus, there is so much freedom that it actually shocks me and sometimes gets a little frustrating, because I think we could get more done if we were more cohesive. But I'm not running the show.
Now, if you want to take a couple of minutes to make a closing statement, it's your time to do so.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you for having me in. I've been surprised by my first 2 years in Springfield. I've never been in a town where your fortunes can change as fast. It has been eye-opening. It has been challenging. It has been enjoyable. But I'm very pleased to say that I've done what I think is a really good job. And I'm a person who has come in, I've done all minority work, which is good. I have friends on both sides of the aisle. Talk about some great people I know who are on the other side of the aisle. Think about like Frank Martino. When we had a district map, our off thing put us against each other. And I was once in a room and I said, I would have had to run against Frank. And I said, boy, I'd be awfully tough to beat the guy once I'd endorsed him. So, there are a lot of great people down in Springfield who work really hard. It's not all the partisan nightmare that you expect, and yet, in the end, it comes down to, and I hate to be an us versus them, but it basically comes down to Chicago versus the state of sanity. And we cannot continue to go down the road of having that one city drive this state toward oblivion. We need to continue the moves toward being responsible that we've had. I'm really pleased that we've had better budgets. I'm pleased that we are working on some of the tough issues. You look at pensions, you look at Medicare or Medicaid reform, and you look at even education. Those three things, by the way, are 80% of every dollar Illinois spends. Those three items. So we're looking at big elephants in a complex room. But I'm really pleased to say that I've been able to work across the aisle. I've been able to work with my friends. I've been able to work with people who, in theory, are my enemies. And I've been able to, generate respect and support. I'm a nice guy. and there's nothing wrong with that, even in politics. If you told me prior to the re-election of Rod Blagojevich that I'd be sitting here today doing what I'm doing, I'd have laughed in your face. And I can forgive anybody for 02, but by 06, we knew the guy was dirty, and a crooked state shoved him down our throats again. And that's what got us involved. And I said the dumbest words to my wife I've ever said. Okay, dear, we can get involved in politics again, but the good news is they won't ask me to run for anything. And they asked me to run for county board, and we won. And then after we won, the state guy said, "You won in Rock Island County. You must know something about this." And so then they asked me to do this. And every day is a challenge, every day is an adventure, and every day is an opportunity to serve the people who are my bosses. I work for the people, and I look forward to the opportunity to continue doing that. I thank you again for this opportunity. Of course, I covet your endorsement. I would appreciate it greatly. But I really need the endorsement of the people.
Well, Representative Morthland, we appreciate you coming to participate in this online interview tonight. We obviously appreciate all of the people who watched, and we would like to encourage everyone to make sure to vote on or before November 6th. Thank you.